Something significant has just unfolded, involving a player many Pittsburgh Steelers fans watched grow over the past few seasons. And it marks the end of a chapter for one of the speed threats who quietly became part of the team's offensive rotation. Wide receiver Calvin Austin is officially moving on from Pittsburgh and will continue his career with the New York Giants after agreeing to a one-year contract worth up to $4.5 million. For Steelers fans who have followed Austin since draft night, this moment carries a bit of history behind it. Pittsburgh selected Calvin Austin in the 4th round of the 2022 NFL Draft, taking a chance on a player known primarily for his elite speed, quickness, and big play potential coming out of Memphis. The idea at the time was clear: add an explosive weapon who could stretch defenses and bring a different dimension to the offense. But Austin's NFL journey didn't start the way he or the Steelers envisioned. During training camp in his rookie year, he suffered a foot injury that forced him to miss the entire 2022 season. For a young receiver trying to establish himself in the league, losing that first year of development was a major setback. Many players struggle to recover momentum after something like that, especially at a position where timing, chemistry, and confidence are everything. To Austin's credit, he didn't disappear after that lost season. Instead, he worked his way back into the offense and gradually carved out a role over the next couple of years. What fans started to see was exactly what scouts talked about during the draft process: a receiver with burst, agility, and the ability to turn small opportunities into explosive plays. By the time the 2025 season arrived, Austin had become a recognizable piece of the Steelers' offensive depth chart. That season, he recorded 31 receptions for 372 yards and scored 3 touchdowns. Those numbers might not jump off the page compared to some of the league's star receivers, but they reflect a player who was contributing when called upon and continuing to develop within the system. Looking at his entire time in Pittsburgh, Austin finishes his 3-season run with 84 receptions, 1,110 receiving yards, and 8 total touchdowns. Considering he essentially lost his rookie season to injury, those numbers represent a respectable stretch for a 4th-round pick fighting for targets in a competitive receiver room. Now the next chapter begins in New York. The Giants turn to Austin after losing wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson in free agency. Robinson recently joined the Tennessee Titans, where he reunites with former Giants head coach Brian Daboll, who is now serving as the Titans' offensive coordinator. That departure created an opening in the Giants receiver group, and Austin appears to be part of their plan to fill that role. From the Giants' perspective, the move makes sense. Austin brings speed and versatility, and he has already shown flashes of what he can do when given space in an offense. For the Steelers, however, this also means saying goodbye to a player who spent 3 seasons trying to prove himself in Pittsburgh after overcoming early adversity. And when you look back at his journey, it's hard not to appreciate the persistence it took for him to go from missing an entire rookie year to becoming a contributor who produced over 1,000 receiving yards during his time with the team. Now the question shifts to what this departure means for the Steelers moving forward and whether the team already has a plan to replace that speed element in the offense. So let me ask you this: how do you feel about Calvin Austin leaving Pittsburgh and joining the Giants? And do you think the Steelers will miss his speed in the offense? When you look at Calvin Austin's departure a little more closely, it also reflects how quickly things can change for depth players in the NFL. One moment, you are part of a developing role within an offense, and the next moment, the opportunity to take on a new challenge appears somewhere else. In Austin's case, the New York Giants presented exactly that opportunity, offering him a 1-year contract worth up to $4.5 million as they look to reshape their wide receiver group. For the Giants, this move is clearly connected to the ripple effect created by free agency. When Wan'Dale Robinson left the organization to sign with the Tennessee Titans, it created a vacancy in their receiving corps that needed to be addressed. Robinson's move itself had an interesting connection, as he followed former Giants head coach Brian Daboll, who recently stepped into the role of offensive coordinator in Tennessee. Once that departure became official, the Giants began looking for a receiver who could bring quickness and versatility to the offense, and Calvin Austin fit that profile. For Steelers fans, though, the story is less about what the Giants gain and more about reflecting on the path Austin took during his time in Pittsburgh. When he was drafted in the 4th round back in 2022, many analysts saw him as one of those classic Steelers draft selections, a player with elite athletic traits who might need some time to develop, but could eventually become a dangerous weapon in space. The biggest obstacle came almost immediately when that foot injury during training camp wiped out his entire rookie season. Losing that first year meant Austin had to spend months recovering instead of building chemistry on the field, learning the speed of the NFL through live game action, and establishing himself in the offense. For many players, that kind of setback can completely derail early momentum, but Austin managed to work his way back into the lineup over the following seasons, gradually proving that the explosiveness he showed at Memphis could translate to the professional level. Over 3 seasons with Pittsburgh, he accumulated 84 receptions, 1,110 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Those numbers tell the story of a player who didn't become a superstar headline name, but did manage to carve out a meaningful role when healthy and given opportunities. His 2025 season in particular showed flashes of that big play potential, with 31 receptions for 372 yards and 3 touchdowns. Austin demonstrated that he could contribute as a complementary receiver capable of stretching defenses and creating mismatches with his speed. Those types of players often don't dominate the stat sheet, but they can influence how defenses line up and open space for other playmakers. Now the focus turns to what happens next for both sides. For Calvin Austin, joining the Giants could mean a chance to compete for a larger role in a different offensive system. Sometimes, a change of scenery is exactly what a player needs to unlock another level in their career. For the Steelers, this departure adds another layer to the ongoing evolution of their roster. Every offseason brings movement, especially at skill positions where teams constantly look for speed, versatility, and depth. Austin represented one of those unique elements, a receiver capable of turning a short pass or a quick motion play into a sudden explosive moment. The reality is that players like him often become fan favorites not only because of their speed, but also because fans watch them fight through adversity and develop over time. Missing an entire rookie season could have easily ended his momentum before it even began, yet he still managed to produce more than 1,000 receiving yards in a Steelers uniform. Now his journey continues somewhere else, and it will be interesting to see how his role evolves in New York and whether he can take advantage of this new opportunity. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Calvin Austin could break out with the Giants after leaving Pittsburgh, or do you believe the Steelers might end up missing the speed and versatility he brought to the offense? It's also worth thinking about the broader perspective of what Calvin Austin's time in Pittsburgh represented, because his story is one of those quiet journeys that often gets overlooked when people only focus on star players and big contracts. Not every player enters the league and immediately becomes a headline name, but many still play meaningful roles within a team while fighting to establish themselves in the NFL. Austin's situation was unique right from the start. Being selected in the 4th round of the 2022 NFL Draft meant expectations were balanced. He wasn't entering the league with the pressure placed on first-round receivers, but he was still viewed as a player with the potential to surprise people because of his speed and playmaking ability coming out of Memphis. That type of profile often excites Steelers fans, because Pittsburgh has a long history of developing receivers who initially arrive with something to prove. The unfortunate foot injury during training camp that cost him his entire rookie season could have easily changed the trajectory of his career. Missing that first year meant he had to watch from the sidelines while other young players were gaining experience, building confidence, and learning the rhythm of the league through real games. For a receiver whose game is built around timing, explosiveness, and chemistry with quarterbacks, that kind of delay can make the path forward much more difficult. Yet when he finally returned to the field, Austin showed that the ability that made him an intriguing draft pick was still there. Over the course of his 3 seasons with the Steelers, he produced 84 receptions for 1,110 yards and 8 touchdowns. Those numbers represent the work of a player who continued developing while competing for opportunities in an offense where touches are never guaranteed. His 2025 season offered another glimpse of his potential impact. Recording 31 receptions for 372 yards and 3 touchdowns. Austin contributed when his number was called and demonstrated how his quickness could create separation and open space in the passing game. For players with his skill set, sometimes a single big play can completely shift the momentum of a drive, and that type of ability is always valuable within an offense. Now, with the New York Giants offering him a 1-year deal worth up to $4.5 million, Austin enters a new phase of his career where the opportunity could look very different. New environments sometimes provide players with new chances to prove themselves, especially when teams are reshaping their roster after free agency changes. And that is exactly the context surrounding this move. The Giants needed to address their receiving depth after Wan'Dale Robinson left in free agency to join the Tennessee Titans, where he reunited with former Giants head coach Brian Daboll, who now serves as the Titans' offensive coordinator. That chain of moves opened the door for Austin to step in and compete for a role in New York's offense. For Steelers fans, though, this moment is more about reflecting on a player who spent 3 seasons wearing the black and gold and worked through early adversity just to earn his place on the field. Not every player stays with one franchise forever, and roster changes are part of the reality of the NFL. But each departure still marks the end of a chapter for someone who contributed to the team's journey over the years. Austin now takes his speed and experience to a new team, while Pittsburgh continues shaping its roster for the seasons ahead. It will be interesting to see whether this fresh start allows him to take another step forward and perhaps unlock a bigger role than the one he held during his time with the Steelers. And now the conversation turns to the fans, because your perspective on moves like this is always part of what makes following this team so interesting. Another detail that stands out when looking back at Calvin Austin's time with Pittsburgh is how his role slowly evolved once he finally got the chance to step on the field. After missing that entire rookie season because of the foot injury suffered during training camp, his career essentially started a year later than most players from his draft class. That meant every snap he played afterward carried the weight of catching up, learning the offense, building timing, and proving that the Steelers' decision to draft him in the 4th round back in 2022 was the right one. When a player loses a full season early in his career, the margin for error becomes smaller. Coaches already have other young players developing, new draft picks arrive every year, and the competition for roster spots never slows down. For Austin, earning those opportunities meant showing that the traits that made him successful in college could translate to the professional level. His quick acceleration and ability to move in space were always considered his biggest strengths. And over time, Steelers fans began to see glimpses of those qualities on the field. Across 3 seasons in Pittsburgh, Austin managed to build a respectable statistical profile despite the unusual start to his career. He finished his run with the team recording 84 receptions, 1,110 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. For a player who essentially lost his first season entirely, reaching over 1,000 receiving yards with the franchise shows that he found ways to contribute when given the chance. The 2025 season offered another example of that progress. During that year, he caught 31 passes for 372 yards and scored 3 touchdowns. Those numbers reflect a player who continued carving out a role in the offense and demonstrating that he could provide depth and occasional explosive moments when called upon. Sometimes players like Austin become important not only for the plays they make, but also for the way they force defenses to respect their speed. Now the opportunity in New York represents a fresh start. The Giants' decision to sign him to a 1-year contract worth up to $4.5 million shows that another organization sees potential in what he can bring to the field. In the NFL, short-term contracts often function as proving grounds. Players arrive with the goal of showing they can expand their role, increase their production, and potentially secure a longer future with the team if things go well. In this particular situation, the timing of the move also connects directly to the changes the Giants experienced during free agency. With Wan'Dale Robinson leaving the team to join the Tennessee Titans after following former Giants head coach Brian Daboll, who is now the Titans' offensive coordinator, New York needed to adjust its receiver group. Austin's signing becomes part of that adjustment as the organization looks for players capable of filling the space left behind. For Steelers fans watching this unfold, it becomes another reminder of how quickly roster dynamics can shift in the NFL. A player who spent 3 seasons developing within the organization now moves on to test himself in a different environment. At the same time, Pittsburgh continues reshaping its roster, constantly searching for the right combination of talent and depth at every position. And sometimes that's how careers unfold in this league. A player spends several seasons with one franchise, gains experience, proves he belongs, and then another opportunity emerges that leads him somewhere new. Calvin Austin's journey now moves to New York, but the 3 seasons he spent in Pittsburgh remain part of the path that helped shape his professional career. The real question going forward